And he looked at me as if I was crazy because you leave a lot on the table, right? Like it's a somewhat secure job. It's a great company to work with. It's exciting. It was a lot of money at the time as well. But I said I wanted to feel more impact.
Hello, welcome back to the Good Soup podcast. I'm Polina, and today, after a very long summer break, we are sharing an episode that's very close to my heart. Today's guest is Karolin Beck. She is a venture partner at Tola Capital and a former CMO at ThingProject. But she was also my manager at Sauce Labs, and if I had to name one person who influenced my career the most, that would be definitely her. That's why I'm so happy to have her and have a conversation and share it with you, because she's incredibly inspiring. She had an amazing journey that she shares very openly. She talks about how she was first struggling to find her first job in Germany and then build an incredible career in the US and then came back to Europe, and how it all came together with a lot of unexpected turns. She also shares a lot of tips on how to think about your career moves, startups versus corporate. I hope that you will enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Let's go right in. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you today because I feel like we know each other for such a long time, but you know how it is. You never have time to actually ask questions. I feel like the podcast is the perfect opportunity to just, get inspirations from you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start maybe with just the overall intro for our listeners. Both of us looked at your LinkedIn yesterday and we were like, oh my God, how are we going to talk about all of that? Maybe we can just give a quick overview and then we'll dive into each of your experiences.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for having me. So I'm Karolin. I am based in Munich in Germany, and kind of my career started somewhat coincidentally. I was writing my final thesis at Fujitsu Computers, Fujitsu Siemens at that time, about the strategic alliance between Oracle and Fujitsu Siemens Computers. And so that kind of was something that was available. It was a super interesting topic. Was obviously before the cloud, so it was all kind of still box software. And so after I was done, and I loved living in Munich, so I moved from Bremen to Munich and loved living in Munich, but I had a really hard time finding my first or landing my first job. And so kind of to everyone out there who's kind of maybe at the beginning of their career, like it's never smooth sailing. Like I wrote hundreds of applications and could not for the life of it find a job that kind of was directionally what I wanted to do. And so I had done a few internships during my studies. I studied a year abroad. And so I kind of felt like I was on the right track, but it proved to be challenging. And so during that time, I was really into horse riding, into dressage. And so my trainer at the time, she sat me down one evening and she's like, so what are you going to do? Like, you're done with your studies. You have to find a job. And so she said, I have one of these clients and he works at Microsoft. So I'm just going to introduce you. He's in Paris. I don't know exactly what he does at Microsoft, but you should talk to him. And so I had my very first kind of application where I had to, like, literally it was kind of, we didn't have video calls or cell phones or anything, right? Like it was literally on my landline calling this guy in France where I didn't know what he was doing. And so coincidentally, he was responsible for the strategic alliance between SAP and Microsoft. His marketing manager at the time went on maternity leave. And he's like, well, actually, I do need someone. I packed up, moved to Heidelberg, which is close to Walldorf at SAP headquarters, and started my first job there. And so it was kind of purely coincidental that I kind of landed that. And so what happened then is I loved the job. I loved the team. It was kind of an international role. I was kind of working with the whole EMEA team. And so we had different kind of people all over Europe. And so my role really was to provide marketing support for them. So it was a great lead into kind of the marketing function. It was all offline. So my first kind of marketing project was to do an advertising campaign in the Lufthansa flight magazine. Like I still have the copy. I'm quite proud of it. And so kind of as everything moved into kind of more event driven, so I got the opportunity to look at everything for a little bit. And then marketing manager came back. There wasn't a role for me on the team, which I knew before. So it was for 2 years. And then the global team said, well, had you ever considered moving to the US? Because we will have the same role, just on a global level. So I decided to move to Seattle. So my mom and I still joke about it because I said it would be like 2 or 3 years and then I would move back. And so I ended up staying 15 years in the US total. And so I arrived in Seattle and kind of very quickly it became more than just the SAP Alliance. And there was always kind of opportunity to grow my career. In a large company like Microsoft, you have a tremendous amount of opportunity that I will always be grateful for. But it also can be very hard to navigate because you're only like a super small puzzle piece in this big machinery. Like I think at the time I was working there, we were over 100,000 people. Also, I'm a non-technical person, so was always with a very technical audience, which kind of got it exciting or made it exciting for me. I stayed at Microsoft for a total of 10 years. Part of it was I knew that if I left Microsoft because of the visa situation, I had to move back to Germany. And so I also got a lot of career opportunities from Microsoft, but I always knew I didn't want to be the person who spent 30 years at Microsoft. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't for me. And so I still remember the day that I walked into my boss's office that I really liked. And he, like, it's always hard because, like, you can't prepare someone for it. And so I walked in and I'm like, look, I'm resigning. And he looked at me and he was like 30 years at Microsoft at that time. And he looked at me as if I was crazy because you leave a lot on the table, right? Like it's a somewhat secure job. It's a great company to work with. It's exciting. It was a lot of money at the time as well, right? I mean, talk about that one. But I said I wanted to feel more impact. And so one of the last roles at Microsoft, I was working in alliances with startups. So we had launched the cloud and the goal was to encourage startups to bet on the Microsoft cloud. So they historically kind of all were in the AWS environment. In talking to these founders, I was like, well, this is really cool because they left corporate careers to really go and do and build something. Like there is a lot of risk associated with it. But I was always kind of very much a risk taker. Like I'm more of the experience than I am about kind of stressing that I may not find a job. I found it hard to really think about what I want to do next while working kind of 50, 60 hours at Microsoft. And so I just decided to take a break. I took a full year off, which was great at the time. So I backpacked through Burma and had lots of experiences, enjoyed Seattle in the summer. It's beautiful there. And so then I started to apply for roles and kind of this was my first lesson learned, I guess. It's like the importance of building a network kind of early on in your career, right? So who are the people who kind of can recommend you somewhere? I had a strong network, but it was only within Microsoft. And so outside of my little, we always called it the Redmond bubble, it was getting hard because if I was applying to jobs, they were kind of, well, but she only knows Microsoft. They have a bunch of kind of support and vendors and kind of people doing the job for them. And so that was kind of what I was almost fighting against. But through a connection with someone in business development that I used to work with, like he got me a conversation with the chief marketing officer at Chef Software, which is an open source company, really deeply technical, focuses on infrastructure automation and application automation. We got to talk and it was almost like the perfect match. So we had a few sessions and he was like very unstructured, super creative, like very much kind of a great person to work for. And I was like very German, like super structured, data driven, still creative. But if I were to say kind of where's my strong suit, I wouldn't say creativity is kind of it. So I built out their international marketing team. And then he sadly left Chef. I ended up kind of running the whole marketing team for Chef. And so that was kind of my second lesson learned, is like, you need to raise your hand. Like if there's an opportunity, you kind of just want to proactively have the conversation to say, hey, what would it take for me to do that in the interim? What would it take for me to get the job? That was super fun. I was a little bit bored with living in Seattle. Our chief revenue officer went to another company. And so I decided to join him. Source Labs is the company. And what was interesting there is I was able to kind of help him restructure the way sales is done. So from kind of a mid-market approach into truly an enterprise sales motion. And also I was able to own the self-service business. And so that was kind of at the beginning of this whole notion of product-led growth. Like, how do you make sure that you structure a free trial, that it's super delightful for prospects so that they kind of then can online just convert into a paid plan. I did that. I moved to San Francisco. It was a great time. I loved the job. I loved the team. I loved kind of the newness of living in California. It was outrageously expensive to live there. So it was my little luxury for 3 years to be able to live in the city. And then with Source Labs, I had the opportunity to move back because at the time, the general manager for the region was kind of starting to think about what's next, which is where I met Paulina. She was on that team. And so it was really exciting. So I came back. I led the European marketing team that historically the majority of the business was in the US. And then kind of we were able to do a lot of really exciting things in the EMEA region. Yeah, I don't know. And then what happened then? So I ended up feeling a little bit about that I didn't have as much of an impact again, kind of being in a region, because the decisions were still being driven in the US. And so, and I'm sure, Paulina, you felt that as well. It's kind of like our team was a little bit like, okay, here are the campaigns, now go and execute. And so, again, I talked before on how I'm not very creative, but that was kind of too much structure for my liking. And so I got the opportunity to have kind of the next step in my career where a construction tech company offered me the position as chief marketing officer. They were based in Munich, which was great because that was where I was living. So yeah, I joined ThingProject. They were in an interesting time where they were just being sold to a private equity company. I kind of did that for 2 years. We sold the company successfully. I stayed on for the transition. And then I kind of was thinking about what's next for me. Here's also where the network comes in. So way back at Microsoft, I met Sheila Gulati, who was the first female general manager that I knew at Microsoft. And again, like, it still is a problem, but at the time you had very, very few women kind of as your role models and as kind of senior persons in the company. She was responsible for launching the Microsoft Cloud. And so she was fighting a lot of uphill battles. I was in many meetings with her, and she was just, or she still is, like, super impressive. And so talking about someone that you look up to, like, she is that for me. And then she decided, after launching the cloud together with Stacey Giard, who I also met and work with at Microsoft in the developer division. They said they didn't want to work on the infrastructure layer, but they want to kind of enable the startup ecosystem on top. They founded Tola Capital, which is a venture capital based in Seattle, investing in early stage software companies. And so I've always stayed in touch with them. When they had something interesting kind of in the marketing area, I was looking at it from an advisory perspective, kind of assessing the technology. If they had something in Europe, I would meet with those people. And so we kind of just loosely stayed in touch. I never in a million years would have thought that that would ever be my career path. Like, I don't have a finance background, right? And so when I left ThingProject, one of the projects I was leading there, because construction is so heavy in greenhouse gas emissions, I really got into the topic of the path to net zero climate goals. And it was something that I was super interested in. particularly around the reporting angle and how difficult and manual it is for a company like ThingProject to just report on their greenhouse gas emissions, which should be super straightforward. And so I approached Sheila and Stacy and I said, hey, by the way, I'm available. So if you hear of any interesting companies, like let me know, keep me in mind. And they said, well, actually, what do you think about kind of just joining us? Because we want to drive a hypothesis around sustainability. So why don't you join us for a year? And so I joined as a marketer in residence, and I kind of really got into the world of sustainability and then quickly kind of looked at other topics as well, because it kind of just is a fascinating space. And so that's kind of after the year, we were like, so what do we do? And I kind of always assumed I would go back into the business. And then they offered me a position as a venture partner. So the majority of my time I spent on kind of working with our existing investments around their marketing and go-to-market strategies. Oftentimes they are very technical founders, and kind of marketing messaging isn't necessarily their area of expertise. And so that's super fun. And then the rest of the time I'm spending on kind of looking at interesting companies in the enterprise space. Sorry, that was very long, but I hope it kind of makes sense on why I made some of the decisions that I did.
I love it.
That was great. I feel like in this entire time you shared so many nuggets of wisdom. And you have given us probably so many follow-up questions.
Awesome.
For me, the highlight of the moment right now is at the beginning you said that your horse riding teacher was the one that basically helped you land your first job. Like, that's so crazy and so random, and it's just a testament to how important your network is, regardless of who that person is, because you never know who knows who. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of also not being afraid. Like, I didn't ask her, right? So she approached me. But just the other day, I had a daughter of a friend of mine kind of email me saying, hey, I need an internship in an English-speaking country. Like, do you have any ideas? And so through like weird connections, she's now going to South Africa to do an internship with someone that my friend used to work with at Microsoft. And so it's kind of, don't be afraid to ask for help as well. Like, it is hard to land your first job or any job. It always helps to kind of have a word of just endorsement, and then kind of looking at it from the other perspective. Like, when I was the hiring manager, I was always super appreciative if someone pinged me saying, hey, I saw this job and I have this person. Can I just connect you, right?
Yeah, totally. I think it was a highlight for me as well. Like, I was just sitting and thinking, like, do I even have a CV? Like, have you ever updated your CV? It sounds like you always landed your jobs just through connections.
I actually do have a CV, and I like when I applied for roles between kind of Microsoft and then landing Chef, like, I sent, I don't know, like 150, 200 applications, and no one wanted me, because everyone kind of had this idea of what someone who spent their career at Microsoft can and can't do. And so I do have a CV.
That's also so interesting, that bias, because one would think if you go to one of these big tech corporations, you're guaranteed to land a job afterwards, and you struggled so much to get one.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, because you said you're not a technical person, and yet all of your jobs have been highly technical. How have you navigated that?
So asking a lot of questions, right? So I typically try to be super so in enterprise sales, you typically have a solution engineering team. So the people who kind of do all of the demos for their enterprise customers. And so sitting through a lot of kind of those conversations to like, I was never able to use the technology, but I had to understand kind of how it works, particularly kind of to build out kind of what are the true benefits of using the technology. What would they do if they didn't use it, right? So Chef is a good example of that. What was the old way of kind of software development versus kind of what's the transition into the new world? Sometimes I feel it also allows you to really get into the details, where a lot of technical people will just assume everyone has that same knowledge. but you are talking with a lot of customers who may be of different kind of skill levels as well. And so being able to explain a highly technical problem statement or a highly technical solution to someone who may not be as advanced. A lot of tech companies that don't scale fail at that because they are very much, oh, here's the nuts and bolts and all of our integrations, rather than focusing what's really the enterprise problem and why are we best suited to solve that problem for you.
I think that conversation of benefits over features is such a struggle for marketings to get in the heads of founders and CEOs. Like, people don't care. People want to know what you're going to do for them. So interesting to see that it's like a forever struggle.
Yeah, and also not like this kind of need to not answer every single question, right? So it's kind of like, no, you want to learn more, you kind of want to come and talk to us and be in our network. Oftentimes when you market to developers, like there's the saying, which I agree with, like developers don't like to be marketed to. And that is true, but they still kind of want to understand how to be better in their jobs, how to use technology to kind of make their lives easier. And so how do you translate that? How do you, I mean, Paulina knows this because she's worked kind of on all of our community efforts, right? How do you just connect and bring people together that naturally may not be the connectors, right? That naturally may prefer sitting somewhere working on their own rather than kind of going out for drinks, right? And so it's kind of like there's a place for every person and for every skill set in a company for the company to really be excellent.
Nice. Yeah, I think one of the other things that stood out for me is your motivation to have impact. I think you mentioned that a few times, and I think that's a big motivation for us as well, and for a lot of people, like a lot of young, ambitious people, that we want to work for a company that has like some impact to the world. And also us, we want to work at smaller startups because we want to feel this kind of like that we are building something. And I think there are two paths that I want to us to take. And the second one would be the comparison between Europe and the US. I feel like there's a lot of pain in people who live in Europe and who feel like everything is happening in the US.
Yeah.
But before we go there, also maybe we can talk about a bit more about the corporate versus startup world. Like, for example, if you started your career right now from scratch, what would you advise to people who want to decide like whether to go to a corporate job and navigate somehow and build their career there, or to go straight to startups?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one that I thought about often. I think there is no right or wrong answer, right? I think it's all about kind of trying to understand of what motivates you. There's, again, no right or wrong answer. Like, I'm talking to a lot of people, not a lot, but I'm talking to people who will say, like, particularly in sales, you will see that often, right? To say, look, I just want to maximize my income. Like, I want to have success by maximizing my income. And that's, I think, a fair goal in life to have. I think for me, what was always clear is I wanted to work internationally. Like, that was kind of the one thing. So I was very fortunate that my best friend from like middle school, her dad was a professor in Bremen, our hometown, and at the University of Santa Cruz. And so they kind of spent time here and there. And when I was, I think, 12, they invited me to join for Easter holiday to spend time in Santa Cruz. And so that was the first time that I kind of was like in the US, and I saw San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge, and that really made an impact on me. And so for me, it was always clear, like, I wanted to not only travel and see the world, but I really wanted to immerse myself into the culture. Now, what I will also say, and I don't talk about that often, but I also had some failed attempts, right, to move abroad. Like right after school, I went to the UK to do horse riding for a year. And it was like a super remote place. There weren't any people. There was only the horses and nothing else to do. And I'm like, oh shit, like, what did I do? Like, I can't stay here in the winter, right? Like, that's not happening. And so I left. And then during university, I wanted to go to Valencia to study there. And so I arrived in Valencia. I'm like, oh my God, I can't study here. Like, it was all math driven, and I liked math, but it was like in Spanish, and my Spanish was like high school Spanish. And I was like, yeah, I mean, who am I kidding? And so it's also what I'm trying to say. It's also about you try things multiple times, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't, but don't get stressed about it. Now, corporate versus startup. Again, what I appreciate about Microsoft and kind of the large corporation is you have a lot of people that do your job, right? So you learn kind of from the best. So if you are in marketing, like I always worked in pure marketing teams, right? Or business development. You also have the opportunity to kind of move within the company in different roles. Like if someone thinks that you are smart and you can do the job, they will give you the job, although on paper you may not have the experience. And so it gives you kind of that flexibility of growth. I liked in the beginning kind of the structure of kind of what I learned, the way the processes were already set up and everyone was kind of adhering to them. Like, again, I'm super German when it comes to that. But it was good for me because I kind of learned what data do you want to look at? Like, what does good look like, particularly in marketing, right? I mean, that's the question we always get. And so those were all things that I really appreciated, that it was kind of a very structured way to build your career. When I moved again, but I was only a small piece. Like, I sometimes literally felt like if I don't come to work for a week, like Microsoft would still make the numbers, right? Like, I didn't have I didn't feel that influence. And so in a startup, it's completely different, right? Like, a lot of things you're doing for the first time, but you don't really have anyone to guide you because it's like, well, they don't know, right? Like, we hired you to do the thing, so do the thing. And so what I felt, so I think I talked about my experience at Chef when I worked for this super creative, Jay is his name. When he left and I moved into his position, that was the first time in my career where I didn't have anyone above me that also was marketing. And that was weird, right? So that just was weird because my CEO that I was reporting to, he had a certain expectation of me running the team. So I didn't really have that counterpart. And so again, kind of I had to look for who can mentor me, who can be my sounding board that is from the marketing function. So you will see that oftentimes with leaders that kind of once they are kind of the highest person in that function, they will need to have strong sounding boards. Otherwise, it doesn't work anymore because everyone needs to have that exchange. You also need to hire a super strong team, right? People that are experts in their field so that you can have a discussion with them and kind of a conversation. If you only have like first time workers on your team, kind of it falls apart. And so you need to have that right mix. I can't really give a clear guidance other than I fundamentally believe that you need to try out things in order to then kind of say, I probably wouldn't work for a large company anymore. Or like for me, one good example is I did a project once for a friend of mine who was in they barely had a product. And he's like, well, can you help us with messaging positioning? And I did, and it was fine because it was a project. But if I had been their marketing manager, like that would have been frustrating for me because I'm more about scaling than I am about, we came back from a customer, now a product does something different. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Let me update the website, I guess. And so I guess my point is, every job you will have things that you love and things you don't love. I think what I would never compromise on is the values. What values is the company not just talking about on their website, but really living as the person you work for, like your direct or skip level? Are they aligned with kind of your own values? Do they provide you with opportunities? Kind of, do you feel empowered in your role? And I would look more at, personally, I would look more at those things than I would be startup versus kind of large corporation. And maybe one final point, because I think that is becoming more relevant, is like when I started working, like, of course you would go to the office, right? There was no remote working. Be very clear on, is fully remote something that you enjoy doing? Because I do believe that particularly early in your career, you are missing out on some of the learning opportunities if you are working from home all the time. Keep a list of things that are important to you and then don't compromise on them. I think that's kind of the thing. It's like you will get excited about the brand name of the company. You don't love the boss as much, but it will be fine. It never will be.
I'm just in awe by how you just hit the nail in the head with everything that you say, and you speak in such a structured manner, and you're just saying everything.
I'm very German.
That's actually, you keep saying that you're very German, but you've had such like an international career. How has that worked out for you? Like, have you had any struggles with the American style or with coming back to Germany and being Americanized?
Yes. So many. So here's an interesting part. So the first, like the guy that my horse trainer introduced me to, he is French Canadian and had moved to Paris. He helped me land the job in Seattle. And so he said, well, as you are kind of embarking on that journey, one thing that needs to be super clear is you can never go home. I'm like, I don't know what that means. And he's like, you will always be different. Like you will be different when you get there, because your experiences have been so different and your upbringing, and people may look the same and the culture is like there's many similarities, right? I think it would have been different if I had moved to like China or somewhere where it's like obviously so different. But the US culturally feels kind of somewhat similar. And I didn't know what he meant up until I moved back, which is interesting. And so kind of maybe starting with moving to the US. So Microsoft is a very international company and Seattle is a very liberal and open kind of state in the US. And so what I loved about living there is kind of, it was all different cultures, different styles. We had lots of people from South America and we had Canadians, we had Indians, we had like any culture and any skill set. And that is what I loved about it, because we helped push each other in our thinking. And so things that were super clear to me, like, of course it has to be that way, were challenged on a daily basis. And so that was kind of the piece that I loved. What was somewhat difficult is kind of that you are speaking in a different language. And while I would say my English is good, like it's the nuances that you will never quite get. Like, what can you say without like saying it? And so Germans are very direct. And so oftentimes people were like, oh my God, like there's this crazy lady. And so it took them a minute to kind of understand that if you actually were to translate that into German, it wouldn't be rude. It's just the way we would talk. And so that was interesting. That took me probably a year, and then I kind of got into a better swing. So anyone, and I don't know what your experiences are on that, but like anyone moving to a different country, it's like you always have to give it a year before you can even make an assessment. And so you start to have friends that are kind of more meaningful, things like that. So from a work experience, it was amazing to kind of have that kind of range of culture. Now, when I moved back, it was fine because I was still working with the US company. The team that I had in Berlin were also kind of quite international, had different backgrounds. So I think there wasn't as much of a culture shock. When I went to that construction tech company, that was interesting. I had a team and I literally, and I'm not making fun of it, I literally didn't know. I had people who were stamping in and stamping out every day in a tech company. That was news to me. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I just had never heard of that, nor had I ever managed anyone who kind of worked that way. Like, we always had this open, like, if I have a dentist appointment, I have a dentist appointment. and then I come back and do my work later. But it was very, very structured. And so that was kind of hard from a cultural perspective to find ways to motivate and to lead, because I had people in Spain and people in the UK, and then I had a team that was stamping in and out in Germany. And so it was kind of difficult to merge all of these different cultures. And then personally, I thought it was quite hard. You always say that people in the US are somewhat superficial, but it's also easy because they include you super quick. Like, you get invited over, and like, people generally are curious and open, or many people had moved there as well, so they were in the same situation. And then for me to come back to Munich, it was like, well, we have all our friends and we don't have any room for any new friends. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happening here? And then obviously COVID hit, and that didn't help. Like, no one was making new friends. And so it was a bit of a rough landing, I will say that, but you always kind of get around to it. You just kind of need to make changes, make adjustments. And I'm in general a positive person, so I'm not kind of sitting there thinking how miserable I am. So if I'm miserable, I have to change something. And so what's that? And so I think that resilience came from, like, I had moved countries and cities. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
definitely does. You just need to be
Totally.
more flexible, adaptive, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that's also a good place to talk about this difference, not just in like that you covered the cultural differences, right? Sometimes we feel here like we're in a kindergarten. Maybe you know this feeling, like we're just doing something on the side, and when there's something important, everything goes to the US. Like, even if you work in an international companies, I've heard from many of my friends that they start a project, and then once it gets like more traction, then it just moves to the US. And for you, for example, you were in the headquarters, and then you move here, and then you suddenly are like, why are all the decisions made in the US? What are your experiences and just like general feelings on that, and how would you navigate that?
yeah, no, that is a good question, and one that I kind of thought about, obviously, for a very long time. There are companies that are international from the ground up. Like Microsoft, I would consider a company where each of the regions and each of the countries have very clear power to kind of do what's best for the region and the organization locally. Microsoft is unique in that each of the country organizations were kind of their own entity. So if you were kind of staying with kind of the communications example, you had full power to kind of do everything that you wanted to do. SAP is another good example. They do have one of the headquarters in Germany, so that obviously helps, but I also know that the country organizations are very empowered. For startups, just by the nature of it, most decisions will be made where the headquarter is. And so most of the executive team will be where the headquarter is. One of the things to think about early is, if you are in the EMEA organization, for example, will you be able to get onto the executive leadership team, right? Because typically there's only one position, right? Versus if you are in a marketing team at headquarter, there will be multiple leadership opportunities. And so again, it also depends on the size, right? So if I'm looking at startups, let's call them under 100 people, it's important that decisions are somewhat centralized. If you are in field marketing or events or any of those roles, right, you typically have kind of all of the flexibility because it's so localized. In a field organization, and I think that is important, so if you are working for a company, I would say almost up until 500 people, like, the regional roles will be driven around pipeline and how much revenue do you bring in, right? So it will be less about brand, less about kind of the air cover. It will be truly, are we or are we not hitting our numbers? Oftentimes, you will not be able to kind of take your career all the way unless you kind of have that sales angle in your resume. So that's kind of something to consider as well. So they always said to me early in my career, hey, if you ever wanted to kind of run a region, you would have to have some sales experience at some point in your career.
How did you get this experience? Did you just switch to sales?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity for a year and a half to switch to business development. It's a good skill to have. It's also kind of, again, like in marketing. So I don't think of it as kind of the classic sales, marketing, and customer success, but it's kind of one go-to-market team. And so you should have an appreciation for what the other people are doing for work and kind of what's important to them. And so for sales, it will typically be pipeline.
You mentioned that experience of being the only marketer, and I feel like a lot of our listeners, maybe because they work in startups and like just in our network, a lot of people are actually the only marketers in the team. And so you mentioned like that you were trying to get still like some knowledge maybe from other teams or partners or some stakeholders. Where would you typically look for help? Because I feel like a lot of marketers, they just, they're just trying to Google things and they're just trying to navigate it themselves. But I think it's a really interesting point that you meant, that you actually can still go and learn from other people. So where would you suggest to look for this kind of mentorship?
So one of the things, and again, kind of it touches on my role as well. So if you are in a startup and you are venture capital backed, typically they have a broad portfolio of companies in that same position. So what we at Tola, what we do is we hold frequent kind of sessions on different topics, and then companies can opt in or not if it's interesting to use. An example would be the other day we did a deep dive on messaging positioning. How do you go about it? How do you get started? Why is it important? So I would do those kind of things. So look at your investors, like, are they offering marketing groups? When I was at ThingProject, we had like a great marketing community from our investor, for example. And then there are things like the Product Marketing Alliance, or kind of more marketing focused communities where you can also get those. For me personally, the best way is always kind of people that I've previously worked with. So a good example is like whenever I have a question on digital SEO messaging, like I'll ask Paulina, right? So it doesn't have to be kind of seniority or who works for whom. It's kind of like who's the best at the topic. And so that is when I reach out to Paulina. And then I have another person kind of when we talk about design, right? Where we would say, hey, Arturo, can you take a look at this design? How would you go about it? How would you make that better? And so it's your own personal network, like look at people that you've worked with, like, and don't only reach out if you need anything, right? So it's always good to kind of just stay in touch, give an update, things like that. Ask investors in the startup if there's kind of a marketing community group, or go with a specific challenge and then they will connect you with someone one-on-one, or kind of look for more open communities. Again, Product Marketing Alliance is one that I frequently went into, but I'm sure there's other great ones as well. So that's how I would typically do it.
Do you personally mentor the portfolio companies that you have at Tola?
No, I do. So that to me wouldn't be mentoring, because I actually, like, that is my job. So I go in and depending on what they need and what they want, like sometimes I do full on co-creation of messaging positioning. So they can tell me the story and I can try to put it into a structure, and then they have a starting point that they can kind of then evolve from. Sometimes it's around, hey, we want to launch and we want to do a press release. So either myself or my colleagues kind of help on that front as well. And so it's more around what is the need at this point in time. A lot of it is, for example, I help them on hiring. So if they want to hire the first marketer, I help them with the interviews to make sure that I can test kind of what marketing background they have. And so oftentimes I can ask different questions than a founder who may not have worked with marketing before. And so it's kind of on all fronts. It's not mandatory. So I'm not saying, hey, we need to have a weekly one-on-one. And so with some companies, I have like bi-weeklies, and then others I check in once a quarter. The bigger they get, so initially it will always be kind of the founder or someone on the team. And then the bigger they get, kind of the more mature the marketing organization will be.
Sounds like such an interesting job, to be fair.
I mean, I will say it's super interesting. It's very different from what I've done before. It's also, you are never responsible for anything. Like, I can give guidance, right? But I don't know. I mean, like, hopefully it works out. And so that's kind of interesting for me.
Yeah, I feel like it's the job when you get like enough experiences, like you worked in many different companies, you've seen so much that at some point you're like, okay, I can like quickly look at your website and I can almost immediately see like what's missing, what you need to do. And we feel like we need so much more context, and it's fine, and we need to go into like the product, and we need to ask a lot of people so many questions to then come up with recommendations. But I feel like for you, it's probably like you have a very short period of time for a lot of companies where you can just go in and be like, okay, this is what's missing, this is what you should definitely do.
Yeah, but I mean, make no mistake, it will take also kind of the good news is most companies at this point, I've been part of the investment. So we've looked at them in fairly much detail. So I went through the demo and through all of that. But there's kind of that second side to it where if it's a company that has just pivoted, like I need to start from scratch on how do you talk to customers, what's your demo, and then help them articulate the benefits that are not kind of the standard efficiency metrics. And so, yeah.
Nice. Love it. What is a venture partner? It's in between the consulting, but also like one part of your job is not just talking to those founders, right? But also to decide whether your company wants to invest, right? So that's how much of your time do you spend on that versus then working with the founders?
So I would say I spend 80% with our existing portfolio and then 20% on kind of new companies. One example would be I'm a mentor at the Technical University of Munich. So they have a startup program. And so I kind of just go there as a mentor. A lot of the companies, even though we don't invest, we kind of like them. And so we want to stay in touch. We want to be helpful. And so I do a session here or there. But the majority of my time really is with our existing portfolio. So we invest fairly early. So typically they have a product and have maybe 3 design partners, maybe the first revenue. And then kind of the first phase of growth is how do you now get to like $1 million in revenue. And then from there, you will typically start to hire the team and kind of then you will truly scale. I would say that's kind of the spot where my skills are better than very early on. But messaging, positioning, there's some foundational work that that evolves, but will never fundamentally change. So I can do a messaging positioning workshop with a company that is pre-product as well as someone who is at 10 million ARR. But kind of the scale is easier when someone has a true marketer. Like I can't teach someone how to do SEO as I could, but it wouldn't be a good investment of the founder's time, if that makes sense. Totally. Which is why we have amazing companies like yours.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think one of the topics that also you touched upon a bit is that you were never like a technical person. And then another thing is that we are also women in tech, right? So that's another thing that kind of differentiates us sometimes, and we're like, oh, I feel like we're not the part of this cool tech bro group. Yeah, and I feel like you were always someone who would, like, a lot of people would reach out to, because everyone knows that you are advocating for women, you're trying to always like promote everyone in your team, and I was lucky enough to be one of your team members who was promoted in the company. Yeah, maybe you can talk about that. Like, why did you decide that it's one, like, part of your job and part of something that you would like to do? Because it's not obvious for everyone, and you need to put a lot of energy and thought into that. Why did you decide that that's going to be important for you?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me, actually. So when I started working, there weren't many women, right? So it was kind of, and again, I'm not that old, but like it's just the reality of it. Like the higher you looked up in the hierarchy, the more it was male dominated, particularly in the tech industry. And I fundamentally don't believe anything was done on purpose, or it's kind of like, let's keep them, but it's just a different way of structuring your career. As I started to grow my own career and look at, people that kind of supported me, right? And that can be male and female. So I mentioned Sheila Gulati already, like she always made sure that I had a seat at the table, and she pushed me on speaking up and sitting at the table and not in the second row. And so, but equally, I remember the first board meeting that I ever went to at Chef, where our CRO, who is a male, but he's very subscribed to the we need to give equal opportunity, right? Because it's all about that. It's not about like preferring one or the other, but it's like, does everyone have the same opportunity when they show up for work? And the answer oftentimes is no, but not because other people are proactively kind of against diversity, but more of you gravitate towards similarities, right? So who is kind of similar, who acts similar. And so what we need is kind of women that are the role models, for the lack of a better term, right? I had those. I'm hoping that I could kind of be that for other women that are maybe earlier in their career, to say, look, I mean, this is actually possible, right? And so I think role models are super important, and then allies are super important. So where in the organization will someone bring your name up, although you're not in the room? Again, that is kind of something that we all, as we get into managerial roles, that we should kind of remember and keep in mind. Another kind of good example is a pay gap, right? Again, I don't think that anyone maliciously goes in and says, oh, that's a woman, so we pay her less. But it's around, like, how do you ask for it? How confident are you in kind of knowing your worth? It's super difficult because you don't talk about money or salaries, and it's difficult to compare that, right? Depends on experience and all kinds of things. And I don't want to take away from that. But if I'm a manager and I'm looking at the compensation of my team, I need to make sure that I have a clear understanding on how much is that role earning or paying, right? Like depending on how you look at it. And so again, I don't think that, and those are all things that I think much more work needs to be done. And if I can play a role in that, I'm hoping that kind of I can influence 3 people to kind of do the same thing, right? And so at some point we will have reached equality, but we are not there yet.
Yeah. I think one of the things you really taught me is this habit of speaking up. If you see that something is off, like there are like weird jokes or like someone said something and I never thought about it, and I never thought that it's so important, because also it's very easy to just ignore it and be like, yeah, whatever. But you were the one saying that, like, who if not me, right? So that's how I learned to do it. And when I see those opportunities, I try to also like just have it inside me that I can also try to speak up when I do have this opportunity. So thank you for that.
No, and again, like it is important, right? It is important. Only we walk in our shoes, right? So the Tucker, the CRO at Source Labs, you know him, right? So he said, look, I have no idea what it feels like to be in your shoes when you walk into a board meeting and you need to present and it's all men. Like there was no other female in the room. And so it was a good discussion because I don't think that they understand what it is. And so I had a boss once and he was black, and same thing, right? He's like, look, I mean, I walk into a room and I'm the only black person. Like that is weird. And I'm like, I can relate to that because I kind of can imagine what that feels like. And so again, it's about the awareness, because again, like I'm coming from the point where I do not believe the people that I have worked with in the past have done anything deliberately. Yet if I'm looking at the numbers and kind of the split between male and female in leadership roles, we still have a gap that we need to close. And so how do we do that? And for all of us to kind of speak up and to also kind of point it out and seek an active and productive discussion. Because I also don't think it's productive to say, just because I'm a woman, I'm not getting promotions, because that equally isn't true. But how can we kind of remove our own biases and kind of start to become a little bit more fair in our assessment?
I think it's also interesting or important to remember that this doesn't only start like when you're a manager, but already like at whatever level that you are, that you keep other women in your corner. It doesn't matter if you're a junior or a C level, that you also have to look out for your colleagues and for the other people in the different teams. Remember that in the previous company I worked with Polina, the person that helped me asked for more money and made me realize that I was being underpaid in comparison to the rest was another girl from another team. And she basically taught me, okay, this is how you're going to talk to these people and this is what you're going to say. And she was fully transparent in how much she was making and how she went about it. And it was not my manager. It was not someone above me. It was someone at the same level as me. And I think that's also important to keep in mind, that you can be that person for someone else. You don't have to be someone's manager either.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. And again, like, it also doesn't have to be another woman. It can also be another male, right? So, and I think that's kind of important as well, that we don't get into a one versus the other, but it's kind of like, how do we create equal opportunity? Yeah. No, but I think that's a really good point, particularly around the pay gap, because you never make that up again. And one of the things I also want to be transparent about is it's also okay to make decisions differently, right? So like, it's not always about the next job title or always about the next kind of salary. Like, I probably would make more money had I stayed at Microsoft. I decided kind of for my own personal fulfillment and for kind of what I wanted to do with my life, that kind of different paths would be kind of the right way to go about it. And so what is important, though, is to be super clear about it. Like, if I'm taking a step back from a salary and I'm taking a salary cut, I want to be super aware and like fine with that decision, because there's nothing worse than going to work every day feeling like, oh, I'm being underpaid and I really hate this. And so again, understanding what is important to you. And also, like, there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to optimize for my salary. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I think, Paulina, you mentioned kind of that purpose before, right? So like, working in companies that have a clear purpose and where you can align with the mission of the company. I think there's kind of that trifecta of, you need to work for someone that you highly respect and really kind of enjoy working with. You need to have a company that is aligned with kind of your own values, and then kind of whatever the purpose is, it doesn't always have to be kind of the, like, I work a lot in sustainability, right? To me, that is a very personal purpose, but it doesn't have to be, right? Like, it just needs to be something where you feel you are making an impact with the work that you are doing.
Yeah, I love this kind of like very constructive, very, very positive mindset that you have, that you are always looking for like, what is the opportunity, how can I make it better? Because I feel like in Europe, in particular in Germany, sometimes we're just like in this trap of like, oh, everything is bad. We love complaining, and it's just not productive at all. And I love that.
I agree, and that may bring up another good difference between the US and Germany. So taking anything political right now, obviously, out of it, but in general terms, like in the US, if you are good and you show up, you can go places, right? Like, I always loved that about the US. It was never like someone would give you the benefit of the doubt. Here, it's like, have you done all these 20 things before we even consider you for this role? So kind of that believing in people and kind of empowering them. I have seen that more in the US than I am seeing that in Europe. And so again, like that is just something where we need to change our own mindset a little bit on.
You totally see that in the
And
trajectories of people. Like Polina was once
Yeah.
telling me that the people she worked with at, I think it was Sauce Labs, they were already VP, like the third time VP at some company, and the people in Berlin were like still senior marketer.
I recently
Yeah.
went through like a lot of people from our common network, and I was just looking at their LinkedIn profiles, and I was like, they've been promoted like 10 times in the last 5 years. Like, how is it possible?
Keep
Nice.
in mind, and I don't say that to take a dig at anyone kind of with those titles, but there is a different titling in the US than there is in Europe, particularly in Germany. So, like, if a director title in Germany is like a solid VP title in the US. So there has kind of been that shift lately where kind of like even I'm seeing that where I'm like, I don't know if I would give that person a VP title when I interview them. And they're like, well, I was a VP before, so I'm not moving away, but they are not making that level of salary, right? So it's always important to kind of look at both of those things. And again, like I've also taken roles where I've taken a level down in terms of kind of title because it's fundamentally not something that is important to me, but I can respect if it's important to someone else, right? So I think, again, kind of being clear in what's important versus what's kind of what can you compromise on, and then not move away from it. Because if you had the expectation to go into a company as the chief marketing officer, you compromise on that, you will never be happy unless you get that promotion. But most likely that will be a minute. Otherwise, I would have given you that title.
Interesting. Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to talk about, even though we could have spent the whole day here, is like the future of jobs and AI. And I know you work
Yes.
so much with startups, and they're mostly AI related startups,
Yeah.
right? So I think you have a lot of interesting insight on that. Should we be scared that AI is taking over our jobs? What's your take on that?
So that's a good thought. So I was fortunate enough to see Bill Gates speak the other day. It's like, I don't know, a few months back. And he kind of made a statement around, well, in 5 years, and he literally, I think, said 5 or 10 years, I forgot which one it was, we will not be able to go to a doctor because AI will just do kind of and then we will talk to a person because that's kind of what we want to do, but the diagnosis will be done by AI. And so he was like dead serious on it. And so I don't believe it will move as fast because humanity will not move as fast. So it will not be acceptable. Now, I don't believe that software will be viable if they don't have AI as a component in it. So I think that will be the future. If I'm looking at kind of agentic AI, generative AI, I think there's a great place for everything to make our jobs easier. I also believe there will be some roles that we will no longer have, right? So I think like similarly to kind of when we went through the Industrial Revolution, where kind of through automation and through factories, some jobs just went out of business and then new jobs were created. And so I'm seeing the same thing with kind of AI. Personally, I'm not afraid of AI because I also work a lot with kind of AI safety, AI governance. So I know that kind of a lot of the decisions are clearly being monitored. However, I think kind of bad actors, cyber attacks, things like that will become more sophisticated. Like I'm sure you've seen kind of the impersonation on videos, and I mean that looks real. You can't tell if that's real or not. Like you literally can't tell. And so I think it will be important to kind of govern and put safety measures around it. But I think there's a great opportunity. I believe that humanity and companies need to have strict guardrails on what they allow to do with AI and what they don't. So a good example is Sephora, the cosmetic brand. They have a corporate policy that they will never portray humans with AI. So they will always use real humans because that's part of their core brand premise. And so I think a lot of companies will kind of have their own guardrails around it of what is acceptable to them and what's not, right? I think it's a time saver. Like I use AI technology or AI powered tools every single day and I love it. I think it makes my life easier. We need to be careful that we don't lose our creativity and that we don't get lazy, because there's this amazing book called The Black Swan. And so it basically talks about how it was always kind of the random things that had the greatest successes. And so I think it will be important as a marketer to keep creativity, to not just rely on tools and kind of to look at texts. But then if you are stuck on something, like there's nothing wrong with putting it into like generative AI and kind of get other suggestions, have a discussion with it, like you would with a colleague, right? And so for me, human supervision, particularly in marketing, is super important. Like you should still be, or the human should still be the last checkpoint to push things out for now. I'm sure that will change over the next 5 years, but technology that I've seen right now. But I think kind of all of the busy work as marketers, so if I'm just looking at campaigning, right, like all of the nuts and bolts, like no one loves spending time on that. So spend time on what really moves the needle, which is kind of how do you engage with your prospects, but then kind of the nuts and bolts around like how do you program a campaign. I think that's fine to be outsourced to AI. Like I wouldn't hire a junior person anymore for that, or an intern. I would kind of just do that with an AI tool.
What are your favorite AI tools?
We use Perplexity quite a lot, particularly for research. I think a lot of the technology companies, so Salesforce, HubSpot, all of kind of their AI technologies that they've implemented are really good. And then there's a lot of really great companies, some that we are invested in. So Tracera is a company that is completely automating the greenhouse gas emission calculation for companies. And so that's a super time saving for companies and takes the busy work away. Like in my old world, we had to have like our office manager type in electricity bills, and like no one wants to do that. No one has the time. There's a really cool company, Tofu. They are kind of automating all of the campaigning for marketers. So that's a great team, and also I think really valuable technology for marketers in the future. I also think that if you are a marketer and you are not using AI, you are in deep trouble. Like you should understand what's out there, you should understand how to use it, and you should have an opinion on it. And if you see good companies, send them my way.
Nice, I love that. Yeah, I think for the last minutes, any like tips or just thoughts that you would like to share with us or with marketers that are also trying to navigate their careers, and yeah, just some general tips and some of your wisdom.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. This has been like really good. It's good for me to start to think about those things as well. So that kind of helped me also. I'm not sure if this is kind of for everyone, but I've never been very structured about my career. So I've kind of just flown with opportunities. I believe that if you get too hung up on your next job title or kind of just your career, you also lose a little bit the fun and kind of the thinking outside of the box. Try out things. Like if you always wanted to work abroad, like do it, right? There's no time like now. Like you will not do it like, I mean, some people do, but like super late in your life, you lose the flexibility a little bit. So particularly when you are young, you want to live abroad, do it. And then you love it or you hate it, but you can always move back, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. Think about what is important to you. And I think that's kind of worth to sit down for like a few weeks, kind of spend a few hours and kind of relook at that and make sure that you can very clearly articulate what is important in your career for you and what's not. Really work on building and keeping an active network. Like those will be the people who help you in your career progression, but also in kind of new job opportunities. And yeah, I mean, try things out. Like I can't stress that enough. It's such exciting times right now with kind of the advancement of technology that we have available, I mean, like you can build an app with cursor without being a developer. Like that is mind blowing. Like you couldn't do that 3 years ago. And so it's kind of like just try things out and stay at the pulse. You want to be a modern marketer, and you want to kind of, when you go into discussions, you want to be looked at as someone who kind of really goes and moves with the time. Like the stuff that I've learned in university, like it almost doesn't exist anymore. And so you need to stay at the pulse of things.
Just before the very last question that Valentina is going to ask, are there actually any books that helped you to get this into this mindset? Because I feel like I'm going to re-listen to this episode so that I also get into this positive mindset. But is there like any other resources or books that you would recommend?
No, I mean, outside the usuals, right? Like the Simon Sinek, Start with the Why. Like I think that everyone should have read that at some point in their career. Reread it if you haven't read it in a long time. I think that will always, so there are certain things that will always stay true. And so Valentina, you mentioned kind of the features and functionalities, right? Like start with why the company is in existence, right? And so that's always a good book. Personally, I loved The Black Swan, because it kind of just shows how, as planful and as thoughtful you are, like it's always the black swans that kind of just come in. And so that kind of excites me. I thought that was an excellent book. And then for the rest, it's less about books. It's more about, I actually listen to a lot of podcasts. So there's this podcast that I am obsessed with, which is called Why I Built This, Guy Raz. I don't know if you heard of it. And so he kind of interviews founders that have made it. But every single founder will have a portion where they were like, well, we didn't know if we could make payroll next month. And so it's never smooth sailing. Like regardless if you're building a company or if you're building your career, it's never just kind of linear up. Everyone has ups and downs. And so oftentimes that will really inspire me. And then, those would kind of be the key resources.
Thank you so much for your recommendations. That's great.
Thank you, Karolin, for this chat. This has been amazing. Also, you're so easy to talk to. I feel like we can just ask one thing and just listen, and we're getting all the great wisdom from you. But before we let you go, the question we always ask our listeners is, what's your favorite soup?
My favorite soup of all times is pumpkin soup. Nice. So I love kind of pumpkin in the fall, and so there's like a pumpkin and apple, and I love it.
That's the best answer you can give.
I also love pumpkin. Oh, thank you so much, Karolin. It was really
Thank you. It was great to speak to you. Thanks so much.
It's important because not just in your career, but in general, to have that notion that you are in control of your own life.
Exactly.
Because I feel like the people that tend to be left behind are the ones that are like always thinking, oh no, I can't do this. That's impossible. It's not for me. And they don't even try. And I think that's the thing that like Karolin showed a lot. My life is in my hands. I choose where I go and I choose what's important for me. And that's how I navigate things. And
yeah, because she just changes things when she doesn't like it. When she moved from the US to Europe and she's like, okay, I don't have opportunities in this particular company. It's not like I'm not gonna have them at all in whole Europe. She's like, okay, I'm just gonna find something else, and she does find it. And it's like that for a lot of situations. Like right now people are saying, oh, such a difficult market, I cannot find a job. And Karolin is like, it's exciting market because you get all these like amazing opportunities and the technology is moving so fast. Like, so you can always choose between like how you think and what you bring up, and the energy that you have, I think, really shows up, and then you attract more of this kind of opportunities, even though it's sounds a bit spiritual, but I think that's how it works. Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, not to go all like law of attraction bullshit, but I think it has something to do with the energy that you put out. Like, if you're always in a negative mindset, then I don't think positive things are going to happen to you.
Yeah, because all of the things that she mentioned, they were all super random. Like, I remember one story of my friend. He moved to the US and he was looking for a new apartment, and it was super difficult because he didn't have any documents. And he was sitting at his desk like hours and hours, and he was like sending those applications. And then at some point he was so tired and he went to the supermarket to buy something, and then he met some random guy who was telling him, "Oh, I actually have a flat, do you want to live there?" And I feel like a lot of stories that I hear, and also from Karolin, she's like, "I was sending those applications, no one wanted to give me a job, and then I went horse riding, and then someone just offered me a job." And it's so funny because it happens very often that we get opportunities out of nowhere, or when we don't try so hard.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's also having that openness of anything can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another thing that she said that I loved was, and I wrote it down, like, you can always undo decisions. I think that's the best quote from the entire conversation, because I think it summarizes her entire career in one sentence. You can always undo decisions. Whatever it is that's holding you back from trying something new, you can always you can try it, and then if you don't like it, you can undo it. It's the same. I think it's what helped me move to Nicaragua, for example. Like, if I didn't want to be here, I could always go somewhere else, or to try building La Sopa. Like, if I didn't like doing it, I can just stop doing it and do something else. You can always undo the decisions that you make, unless you have a child. That's not something you can undo. But
there are a few decisions you cannot undo, but most of them you can undo.
Most of them you can undo. Also, I love it that she was very humble about needing mentorship. Like, it doesn't matter if you're the CMO of a company. Like, you still need someone to talk to. You still need someone to guide you through things. Like, you cannot be a know-it-all. Especially if you're like changing industries and you're always in these very technical roles and whatnot. Like, you cannot just know everything, and maybe the CEO of the company expects you to know everything, and you can play the part that you know everything, but it's always good to have someone to talk to and to guide you through things. And I think those are the people that succeed, the ones that are open to listening to advice and to open to being challenged. And I see a lot, like, companies that are not doing so great are the leadership people that think that they know it all and that they don't need advice from anyone. And how does that turn out then? So
100%. And it actually makes you such a good manager, because I remember it was my first marketing job when Karolin was my manager. And she's been there for a long time, like, she's been working in the US, and she had a lot of experience. And at some point I was doing LinkedIn ads, and she told me, "You are the expert, you do the thing and then you show me." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm an expert? Like, you are the expert, you should tell me how to do it." And she's like, "No, I don't know anything about it. You go learn, or you just know social media, so you're the expert." And I was like, "Okay." So you, as a manager, not only are you humble enough to ask for questions, but you also empower your team, and you believe in them, and you give them this push of like, you go and do things, and you're like, "Okay." And it really helped me, because I felt like I am empowered, I have this ownership, and I can go learn and try things, and I just grew so much in that company. And that was definitely due to her mentorship and her managerial skills.
And I think that speaks to not being like an ego-driven person, because an ego-driven manager will be like, "I am the expert, I know what you need to do, and I will tell you what to do," even though they have no idea, because they feel like they need to show that they are the expert all the time. Oh, I love that she mentioned that distinction between corporate and startup is not like as black and white as like we tend to think, like, "Oh, corporations, horrible. No. We don't want them. So boring, so much structure." But then she said it's all about your values, and like also the people that you're working with. If you like the boss that you have, if you like the team that you have, if you all have the same values and you respect each other, what does it matter, like if it's a big corporation or a startup? And it made me think that most of my Nicaraguan friends that live in Berlin, they work for corporate companies, and they are happy there. And I'm like, how can you be happy? And then it's like, just change your mindset and think like maybe they like their team, they like the values. I think it's a lot of what you said, and like the mindset shift. I think, and also it all comes to that openness. Like if you are open to experiencing the joys of a structured work that you don't have to stress about and work 80 hours and stay until midnight and whatever it takes to be in a startup, then you might even like it. I don't know if I will. I'm not there yet with my mindset shift, but
yeah, no, 100%. It's all like every person has their own path, so it makes sense that for some people it's totally valid. For us, it's just that I personally had bad experience working at a corporate job, so I was like, oh no, I will never do it again. But yeah, also like if you work in a super small early stage startups, there are some things that you might not like, that you're like they're shifting gears all the time and you can never actually build something and prove the results. So I guess for us it was like somewhere in the middle. So that's who we help the most right now, is like those growing startups, and they're really fun for us. But who knows, like in 10 years maybe we'll change our minds and it's going to be something different. And you never know, like I'm sure Karolin 10 years ago had no idea she would be like a VC, and it's like, how would you know these kind of things?
it's also interesting to hear people's experience, like career developments, because I would also never have thought that you can be a marketer VC, you know, like, because she's doing, and what she said, like she doesn't have the responsibility. It's like being an aunt, you know, you get the fun of playing with a child, but you have zero responsibility to take care of that child. It's the same, like you get the fun of telling startups how to do the marketing and advise them and guide them, but it's not your responsibility. Like they're not paying you to deliver and the numbers and whatnot. So that sounds also like a fun.
It's a fun job, path. 100%, because they actually needed it. Like I remember when I worked at Stepsize and we had this kind of, exactly this type of, mentor. He sold his 2 companies before, so he really knew, like he could give us tips very quickly. In 1 hour we would get like all the gist of everything that we need to do. And then half of that you disregard because he's completely delusional about our time and how much we can deliver. But that's fine, like the rest is actually working and we are happy, he's happy. And I think, it's a perfect match. Nice.
We have to go to a meeting.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Let's wrap
right now we have 2 minutes?
Yeah,
oh
we
no.
have 2 minutes. That's why I had that alarm go off.
Oh my God.
Run.
See you. Bye.
Bye.